tea as well. It's a day for a vat of tea, I feel. We are talking today about embracing your inner rebel in business, and who better? Who better? The reason why is, funny enough, Karen brought up a very good point. I think a lot of us business owners would have started because we would have seen something that we didn't like, perhaps in the organization or the industry that we were in, or we just wanted to just change something in our lives, like try something for ourselves. And especially the people that we now know of that term of businesses with purpose, right? But it doesn't always have to be like that. You don't have to have this massive calling, but you just know something's not quite right. You've got to make that change. And so I think as business owners, we naturally question, and we naturally challenge, why does it have to be this way? Because where to God, I think that, and a lot of people say this, don't they? If they actually knew what being a business owner would be like, they probably wouldn't do it. Or a lot of people that I know, they might try it for a little while, but they miss the stability, or and that's absolutely fine as well. Look,
and I've known people who've set up and then after a year or two gone actually back to being employed because they just found it too stressful.
And
but it's a different kind of stress, isn't it?
It is a different kind of stress. And I love this BBC article because when people come up to me and say, who's your ideal client? Funny story, but I always love to say rebels, misfits and square pegs, ultimately. And straight away people smile, but they think, and I had a really interesting conversation, someone, really good friend of mine, she is branding expert, designer, and just of course creator. I'm going to have her on the show soon, but it was just such a brilliant challenge. She just turned around, she goes, isn't it interesting? She says, I love what you say, absolutely love what you say, but is it a bit too abrupt, like to say the word rebel? And she was questioning the use of rebel, and I realized I don't think a lot of people really understand what rebel means when we say that, and why we could all be a little bit more rebel. And it was quite funny because for me, on this BBC article, it talks about the benefits of having like a positive deviant, or a rebellious workforce in your company, because they are more driven by passion, a passion to change things in the company, rather than perhaps the perception of rebel, which is to rebel against a company or authority. It wasn't about that. It was about, well, we want to be a positive deviant because we actually want to move forward. And the phrase I hate, Karen, and I said this on my post and I will continue to say it, whenever I hear the words, but that's the way it's always been done, or I always feel like it's the same thing as computer says no, where you just want to punch the screen.
And it's that saying as well, isn't it, that if you keep trying to say no and it doesn't work, you don't keep trying. It's
insanity.
Insanity, basically. But if something is working really well, absolutely leave it. But this way of, well, that's the way it's always been, and just put up with it. It's
Well, I also have a caveat to that, because during this pandemic, I think the interesting thing, I got introduced to this brilliant book, Matthew Syed, Rebel Ideas. And I was just chatting to a gentleman called Mike Weston, shout out to you, thank you, had a great chat. And he's all about sort of managing change and actually how to go from a place of fear to thriving with that change and embracing it. And actually Jan Gould does a lot with change, doesn't she? So shout out to you as well, love your posts. But also it was really interesting because it's about diverse thinking and embracing all different viewpoints. And with this pandemic, what I have found is that some of the ideas that perhaps us rebels would have questioned before are only now coming into place. So let's just take working from home, just for as an instance. People well before the pandemic would have loved and relished the chance of working from home, but the structure said, no, we're making profit, it's all working, I'm not going to change. And I think there is something that has become so interesting about seeing this hybrid model. And every time I see a post on LinkedIn going, oh, the hybrid model's working, or this company is embracing employees can stay working from home, and if people challenge that, I will always write on that post, there are a lot of people that are disabled or through health issues cannot come into an office job or cannot commute, but would relish and absolutely love the opportunity of that accessibility to have that opportunity to work.
Definitely. You know, my partner found the absolute perfect job. He had all the skills for everything. I think it was based in London. He said, can I do it from home? They said, no, you've got to be there. So that whole this was pre-COVID.
Yeah.
You know, I wonder if that's changed now. So that whole presenteeism thing,
Yes.
I think they've realized actually, well, it doesn't necessarily work. It can change.
Yeah, and I think this has opened up something in the sense that even if you think it's working, if you're a business owner or you're at board level, or even if you're an employee, what are you challenging? It's a really interesting idea to be clear on. It's not the working from home that is really the it's this idea of presenteeism, like you say. And again, I've had this with a client that wanted me to come into London for a 20-minute chat. And now we all know Zoom is so much easier. Like at the time it was 20 minutes and it was like, oh, can you do a training session? And I thought, this is all good. This is absolutely fine. But it actually would be so much easier if I did this online. Didn't want it. Did not want it. Whereas now, I'm sure the same client would not even have an issue.
Yeah, I know.
Funny?
Well, I used to struggle getting people onto Zoom. Firstly, they didn't want to be seen talking in video, even though they might meet in person. It's quite bizarre. Or they just struggled with the technology. So that's one thing that's massively helped me. I do not have to send how to use Zoom video links before a meeting. But you're right, it has completely switched, hasn't it? I think.
It has, and I think that you know, when we think about, oh, we're quite adaptable and we're quite resilient, I would challenge that and go, really, are we? Because I think that staying safe and doing what we know is different to adaptability and flexibility when it's called upon you. So I think that for me, rebels and misfits and the square pegs that I absolutely love are the ones that have a set values, and it's like no matter what will be required, they will follow those values. And I think that challenging, and I think that there are so many systems in place. Again, this is pre-pandemic. I'm not even going to talk about what's going on now, but say, for example, I know we'd be here for like 3 hours, but I thought what was quite interesting is that if you look at the school system, if you look at the healthcare system, if you look at, you know, sort of like government, local government, if you look at, you know, the housing system, there are all these different systems in place. They're not working. They're just not working. You know, even when you think about diversity and inclusion, it's like not because something comes about that you have to make that change. It's not working, or it's not doing it, or even women's rights, all these things, you know, we still have got so much more to do. So I thought it was really quite interesting that actually we have to advocate for ourselves, is the one thing that I would say. It's the one thing I've learned in this life, in this business, that you cannot expect, like even when we're talking about government bailouts right now or furlough schemes and everyone's had a sigh of relief, that is not necessarily for me. You know, when I see these things, I think that's okay for now, that's great. But you cannot just think, all right, you know, it makes you look, doesn't it? Like, what were we doing? You know, how can we protect ourselves in the future? Because ultimately it's down to us. And so we could get angry as all we like, but unless we stand up and we make a point of it, I don't think it's wrong to challenge.
No, definitely not. And a lot of people fall through the cracks with that, you know. So some people,
3 million,
you know, with compensation, that some people are sitting very pretty. And there's almost now an apathy, I think, for people to get work because they're so, some of them have been helped out, so don't really need to, but others obviously, you know, there's more mental health issues and anxiety and stuff like that, you know, and not people, you know, trying to get back into that swing of things again or go and look for a job. It's quite stressful, isn't it?
It is. And I think that, you know, that is an issue in itself. Like, actually, we've got to look out for ourselves. We've got to challenge the things that aren't working, because my view has always been that if you're doing well, you know, you should be looking out for the ones that aren't. It's just kind of like my, and that is pretty much the, I mean, I always say this, don't I? There's a phrase that I got introduced to by a client, and, you know, I always say we rise by lifting others, but I love his phrase. It's, you know, well, it's not his, it's a well-known phrase of a rising tide lifts all ships.
Yeah, I
characteristics,
love
you know.
that. Yeah.
And so, you know, I think that is the core of what it's like, my God, like this is how it works. And it's no point. And I think the problem is, and it's a sad thing, no one cares unless it happens to them. So, you know, in terms of a bad health system, you won't really be vocal until you've had to go through it. And because, like, let's be honest, you're very blessed to not have to experience that. But I think it's the experiences of ourselves or who we know around us that is you know, getting to know that, getting to understand that. And I think, you know, I'm not even like pages in and I'm already loving what he's saying about, you know, if you only think one way or from your own experience, you will never understand what needs to change.
Definitely. And I think there's, you know, there's an element, I mean, I've always been quite cautious, all the practical ones. So when I was in a business partnership, he was very much the risk taker. You know, let's try, let's go into that. And then I would sort of draw it back a bit and go, well, hang on, is this practical, blah, 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 blah. And now I think I would be more about, yeah, let's just go for it and try it. Whereas not as much, do you know what I mean? I wouldn't be quite to that level of risk taking. I think I'm not quite there yet, but yeah, I think more likely to sort of just try things out and give it a go. And you know what, if it doesn't work and it fails, you've learned something and you can try something else.
Now, is that your experience as a business owner? Do you think?
Yeah.
Because, you know, I'm all for failing forward. And if you've caught our chats, we are really honest. You know, this is why we do a live and not a polished video, as we said last week. It is so raw.
Yeah.
But
and you know, I mean, we chat to each other and other associates behind the scenes, like, oh, you know, and have a whinge and a moan about something that's not working or trying something else. Do you know what I mean? It's not perfect. And you've got to just sometimes just give something a go, and it can be quite scary, especially like posting on social media. I mean, that's a little bit of a rebellious act, according to some people, because they feel very scared to do that, and what is going to be the repercussions of what they put out there. And actually, you're not going to learn by it or get better at it unless you actually just try it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when I looked at the characteristics of a rebel, like problem solving, challenging, asking the questions, there is a way to do it. And funny enough, somebody, oh crikey, like I love certain people, like, you know, there's a tone of doing it. Like Apple when they burst on the scene, it was about, like, you know, when they said think differently, they weren't saying, oh, you're just rubbish. It was like, actually, we think differently, and they let the products speak for themselves. I mean, it's not necessarily in terms of quality, like when, you know, the devices, when you think about, but it was just a completely different way of thinking that I think attracted other people. And that's what you want at the end of the day. You want to be able to find those like-minded people, absolutely, but also you want to challenge and have an open discussion. And so I think that's the part that we forget, is that yes, it's absolutely right to stand your ground. It's absolutely right to challenge. But the biggest part of that that I have found more so over the past probably 5 years, and I don't know if it's an age thing, maturity thing, I would never say mature actually, but I don't know if it's an age thing, but my draw now is to listen more and not react.
I do. I think that's a massive thing that's missing. And I mean, we've spoken a bit about this as well, haven't we? Sort of listening and how important that is in business, because you've got to be able to look at the other person's point of view. And I see so much on social media, like, oh, I just that's it, blah blah blah. Oh yeah, done. You know what I mean? And it's just, it creates derision and division, and you know, it's just not nice. People have just not learned how to sort of debate in a what's the word? A very I'm not getting the word right, but you know, just
but in an inviting and sort of safe space, I think. So
yeah,
when you look at like RGB,
and just in a common sense way as well. Do you know what I mean? Just something that's, you know, that doesn't get sort of too heated and people, you know, bitching at each other, whatever. Just be able to have a good conversation and question stuff and not be shut down or told off. I mean, I've seen it even on LinkedIn, some really nasty comments, and it's just like, why?
But
you know?
I mean, look, let's be honest, I've done that. I've heard somebody's point of view and I've just shut it down. And this is the interesting point. Actually, the next interesting point I wanted to talk about was cancel culture. And I've got to be honest, this is awful to say, but when it was against someone that I didn't like, I was so pleased. Like when you hear so and so from Twitter's being like pulled off, and you know, off that platform and blocked, and they can't post anything divisive again, or you hear somebody that's got very divisive views that I'm not in agreement with at all, and you know, they're not getting the speaking platforms and they're complaining, and you just think, well, good, I don't want to hear it. and then you saw the launch of GB News, which quite controversial, was something to be like Fox News and encourage that debate. And the old me would have been like, oh my God, like who wants this? And again, I don't know, it might be an age thing, it might be just looking at what's going along, but also realizing how much we've been played by algorithms. I think this is the important thing. We are being played. You are being fed just the information that you will like and engage with. And I think that is an important part in ourselves, to go find other sources. So if you have an argument, you find it, whether you like it or not, you go find the other side of that.
Yeah, it's almost like people telling you what you want to hear.
Yeah,
isn't it?
And so
it's not challenging you, it's not making you think outside the box. And I think it's really a dangerous road to go down, because you become very narrow-minded, you have a very narrow view on things and don't want to discuss anything out of that. It's like, that's it, that's what I believe in, you know, done it. Cognitive dissonance, don't care, not thinking about it. And you know, and it applies to life and applies to business. You know, you've got to be able to work through these things and discuss things. I mean, this is what people used to do in team building, although I don't know how good those team building days are anymore, and obviously they haven't been able to do them for a year and a half. And it's one of the first things I think that gets cut off from a budget as well in a bigger company, isn't it? Things like that going out where you encourage this people to kind of come out with things and be rebellious and discuss what's working, what's not, and what can change.
And I think, I mean, you've had things like 360 interviews, exit interviews, making sure that you're getting in, it might be uncomfortable to hear, but providing that space that's safe to be able to feedback. I think that's really key. I think as well, in business, I think it's, for me, a lot of the companies that I tend to work with are just starting out, and I've got this idea, and it's not going to be a popular opinion, but it's actually a solution. And so when you're working against perhaps an industry, or this is why sometimes media relations might not work for you in terms of PR, because if it's against the grain, or you have to remember that maybe the competitors who have an opposite view of you might be advertising in that paper, so they're going to be controlling what sort of messaging that goes in. So if you have a different opinion, there are so many other ways of building up your standing, your viewpoints, your thought opinion, your leadership. So many different points about that. So if you are that rebel business person, that, you know, business with purpose, passion with a cause, rebel with a cause, there is a way to build that up. Well, no, I mean, look, you've seen it. In fact, this is why I love this dual conversation, because if I think about it, I always think of, you know, Karen as like from a very early, like you've had very strong values, and we were just, you have to share the story. You have to share the story of the bank now. I'm sorry, you just have to. But again, it just goes to show when somebody is aligned with their values, you are testament to how much more business you get, the right customers you get. But I mean, tell us from the beginning, I'm so sorry, when you know, this is again of somebody that wasn't really going for her drive and doing perhaps the wrong thing.
Yeah, well, so because when I first came over here from Africa, I'd done kind of design desktop publishing, but everything here design wise, you had to be on a Mac and you had to be trained in those products or have a degree or whatever. I didn't. I was PC, so I went into what was called sort of as a graphics operator. So you were doing a bit of kind of Photoshop, PowerPoint, stuff like that. But the only kind of jobs you get was in quite big companies. So it tended to be investment banks, big insurance companies, all the ones that I really hate now. So anyway, so when I was in, and we had a great group of people. I mean, I was always temping. They always tried to get me to go permanent to all these jobs, and I never did, because I knew I didn't want to stay there. You know, it was like a stopgap thing. and more I was realizing while I was within that industry, the stuff that was going on, and it was horrific, just what they were investing in, everything like that. So, you know, we had quite a good group that was working within the graphics department, had a good laugh, you know, most of them, you know, very similar values to myself. And anyway, there was protesters outside, and they would joke, oh, Karen, all your mates are down. Downstairs outside, you know, did you see them on the way? And I said, oh, I must have missed them. And I said, well, what are they protesting about? And it was like, well, they're protesting because, you know, the bank is invests money in vivisection and animal testing and all that. And I was like, you're kidding me. And that was just a small thing. I mean, there's arms, all sorts of things. This video is probably going to get taken down anyway. I'm not mentioning the names there, but I would get, yeah, some of the banks would come down, oh, can I do this, whatever. And then can you just actually, can you take that and go down to the shop and get it framed and, you know, and choose something and buy it for me and come back? And I was like, I'm not your secretary, you know. And the supervisor behind me was going, Karen, you can't say that to the banker, they are clients. And I said, I'm sorry, but my job is to do this, and I'm not his secretary. Anyway, so this was going on, and I sort of, and people used to laugh at me because they'd come down and they would go, right, can you get this job done really quickly in the next hour? And I'm like, well, no, you have to wait. This is the pile, and they came first. Oh, no, this is not acceptable. And then he would talk to the supervisor, and the supervisor would go, Karen, you know, can you just, you know, make a bit of amends for this person, this and that? And, you know, it went on and on and on like this. And eventually I just said, this is enough, you know. So I walked into the manager's office and I said, I can't ethically work for this company anymore. And I just walked out the door.
I mean, it's probably more than just being asked. And I think this is the important thing that we were saying. It's not just about the issue. It is something broader than that. It's probably the way that you're being treated, the way that you're being,
yeah.
You know, again, it
was just so many levels. And yeah, it was just, yeah, it just was like, that's it, I've got to find. I think then I went into travel, and I went from earning like 40 something grand a year to 9. But I was like, I don't care,
you're happier. Yeah. But again, it's driven in your values and what you're doing, and similar experience. And, you know, I often talk about this. I turned away from agency because I just didn't like the setup of it. And in fact, the industry had quite a few issues that I just wasn't too happy about. But I just knew what I was good at. And, you know, Lord knows, you know, it evolves over time, but you just know that there are certain things you cannot accept, or you don't want to be pressured into working and accepting. And do you know what's really annoying? This is the biggest bugbear for me right now, is that all these issues, like, they're all hiding in plain sight. It's a phrase that I've been saying over and over again for like the past month. Everything that we actually need to know, if we dug down a little bit deeper, is that it's hiding in plain sight. We could have conversations, we could do our research to find out what is wrong with certain things when we, you know, and we can use that, you know, we can share that. That builds up your case in a way, that builds up your viewpoint, it substantiates it. And a lot of people are talking about misinformation, and of course fact check, you know, make sure you do your background on that. But equally, I know that sometimes when you sent out you shared some things on the environment, for example, you know, somebody might have a different viewpoint, and you could say, right, but you always welcome them and say, I'd like to know more about that, can you share, you know. So it's having the right conversation, I think. But, you know, being a rebel, I think embracing that inner rebel is about making sure that you are getting that information, doing some hard work, unfortunately, to hear both sides, because you know perhaps what you're more aligned to, absolutely. But again, if you don't listen to somebody else's viewpoint, how do you know what the challenges are? And I mean, you know, it takes something like a crisis, doesn't it? I mean, I always loved Ruth Bader Ginsburg, had her best friend, you know, she was Democrat, but she would have, one of her best friends was a Republican in the Senate. Antonio Scalia, I think his name is, but they used to have so much fun, go to the opera outside of work, but they would argue, but they had a common ground of, we both want something that's good. you know. And
Yeah.
yeah, of course there's plain evil out there. Like I will never understand why you're just going to pour rubbish into the sea. I will never understand that. But you know, but there's so much evil out there in a way that actually, when we're looking at the issues that we want to like solve, I love the fact that these two were best of friends and they respected each other through that discourse, through that those arguments. And I think that's something that we need to embrace, is that being a rebel doesn't mean you're an anarchist and you cut people off. It is literally seeing those different viewpoints.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I've got friends whose political views I completely disagree with, they're different to mine. But it's really good to have the debate. And if not the debate, you know, sometimes you will always find underlying things that are in common that will really surprise you, you know, if you just have the conversation. And same, well, you know, with clients such as Jim, and we don't talk political views, but there will be some things that you might disagree with and other things that you do have in common and agree with. But I think that's, you know, it's healthy to explore that and not just dismiss someone just because they've got a different political view to you, or you know, or maybe they do something that you don't quite like.
I always joke, but you know, people that I've just gone, oh, I hate, like I absolutely rare that I say that I hate someone, but oh my god, I cannot stand that person. And then yeah, they say something like, especially if they've got a platform and they're speaking. And then the last couple of years, I've actually found like, oh my god, I'm actually agreeing with you. What's going on? And isn't that a bit of a shock to the system? Exactly what you've just said. When you realise, all right, I do not agree with 90% of what you say, but actually that point, well made. You know, and I'll say to you at that point, thank you for raising that point. So there's no, and again, I'm guilty of it. I am somebody that's like, I don't have time for this, I'll shut down, and you know, and it's not the way to go.
No, and often when they've done like blind tests and stuff, for example, on policies from government from different parties, and people have chosen the opposite to what they would vote for. And this has been proven time and time again. And most of us all want the same thing, you know, when it boils down to it, a lot of us all want the same thing, but they just vote for whatever their father or grandfather voted for, or their friends vote for, what they perceive to think that that's the right choice for them, without really delving in further. So again, you know, I think you've got to be a bit rebellious like that and question stuff and go out there and search stuff and not be afraid to sort of say, you know, this is what I believe in, and this is, you know, why I'm doing this, you know, and people will challenge you for sure. But I think that's the healthy debate that needs to be had.
Absolutely. Oh my god, so much there. We did quite well. I'm sitting there thinking, oh my god, we're going to go on for, I mean, there's two things. So there's this book, and then I'm also going to be reading Be More Pirate. That was the other one.
Oh, I love that. It reminds me of the other Be More Dog, isn't it? There are two one. It's just because it stays in my mind, Be More Dog. And you were mentioning another one we were going to chat about. Was it Harley?
Harley Davidson.
Yeah.
As a brand.
As a rebel brand.
As a rebel. But I mean, I love them because they were already, because we were also talking about Brewdog, weren't we? And saying that, yes, they are seen as this rebel brand, but they started off as almost anarchists. They didn't have a cause. It was just that I could see, where, you know, now we associate Brewdog with sustainability, for example, and they've really positioned themselves at that. But at the beginning, it was more like, we need to make the noise, we need to show that we can do things differently. And I didn't necessarily agree with some of the stunts back then. It was just very attention grabbing and not necessarily kind to like smaller brands, stuff like that. That sort of came through for me. And then again, just listening to some great conversations of how it's sort of like mellowed out, so they've kind of like moved, and they're much more maverick, was the word that was used. And I thought, well, that's interesting. But unfortunately, you know, again, I think this is where the brands with purpose, you would have started your business for a reason. You would have started your reason on that reason would have been based on a belief. Therefore, it's tapping into that belief and carrying it throughout the process, not just changing it. And I think
changing it just to suit your target, or to sort of jump on a bandwagon as such. Yeah, definitely.
And I think those values would stay true. Like, I don't think that when it comes to sort of HR, or how you're treating people, how you're treating, you know, the people, planet, and then it comes to profit. It's like, you know, this is why I'm loving this kind of awareness of actually you can succeed. You don't have to be an a-hole, really, for business, which was such an old, antiquated view, but interesting that we can profit by good practices, and it does work. It just may be, it's lovely to see it when you see companies go stratospheric, but equally, I think, like you said, if your happiness lies at a lower wage, you know, not that low, obviously, but I mean, again, it's like, what's your frame of reference here? What would really make you happy? I mean, I love, I think it's Dan Price, he was the CEO that cut his wage down, and he made sure that the minimum salary was for like £75,000 for all of his staff.
Oh yeah, I think it was a Canadian company, wasn't it?
I think so, and he does so much, but again, it's like based on ethics, value, and I think at the time he would be considered a rebel. I mean, I just remember people thinking business for good was just this airy-fairy way of doing it, and it's not to sound, you know, evangelical about it. It is just the right thing to do, surely. And in fact, every argument that I get across any conversation where people present their views, I'll just go, but is it right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the company, my accountants, Triple Bottom Line, and theirs is all about people, planet, prosperity is their thing rather than profit. And but obviously making profit, but they're just growing now. I mean, they've got 10, they're getting another 2 accounts on, they're growing, but they see that as that is their way of making change happen. So the bigger they get, the more they're influencing, and the, you know, more people are coming to them, and people are starting to do stuff in a different way. So there's nothing wrong with growing like that and getting bigger, as you say, and making a profit. It's about how you do that, and what you're doing underneath that to support.
Amazing.
Good, yeah.
And small steps, you know, it takes a little while, but it starts with those small steps, and just making sure you're clear and vocal about it. So I love it. Oh, thank you so much. I really enjoyed that one. Always yeah, we like to pepper the how-tos and the whys with a little bit more of a broader viewpoint. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. We'd love your views on it. And if you have any other ways of helping us embrace our inner rebel or unleashing it, let us know. We'd love to hear more. So thank you so much for joining, and we will see you next week. Take care.
Take care, everyone. Bye.